We can't fully explain how something so still can endure so much. A tree doesn't move, but it shifts over centuries. It doesn't speak, but it leaves behind the record of every fire, every winter, every gust of salt wind from a sea that has since receded. It stands in silence, but not in stillness. Bark thickens, branches twist, roots explore beneath the soil like slow lightning. It watches time pass. A family grows beside it, then grows old. A path is carved, then forgotten. The sun crosses above 10,000 times. Snow comes, snow melts. It remains. And through all this, it changes. Not in minutes or even seasons, but in rhythms far slower than we are built to notice. It ages slowly, but not in ways we've fully mapped. It heals without scars. It decays and yet stays alive. It resists the usual limits. Somehow, it continues. If you enjoy these calm explorations and would like to continue resting with science designed for sleep, you're welcome to subscribe. And if it feels natural, you can leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. It helps others find this quiet space too. There is a bristlecone pine in the White Mountains of California that began growing before the pyramids were built. It has stood through 5,000 winters, 5,000 springs. Its bark is stripped across most of its body. Its interior is partially dead, and yet its living tissue clings to the edge of its form. New growth appears when the season allows. It still responds to temperature, to water, to light. We can't fully explain why these trees endure longer when stressed. The harsher the conditions, the thinner the growth rings, and somehow, the longer the lifespan. It seems that life, when slowed almost to stillness, becomes more precise, less wasteful. The bristlecone's metabolism is so slow it scarcely ages. But we don't know how it repairs its cells, or if it does, or if its tissues simply avoid damage altogether. In New Zealand, scientists discovered something even stranger. A stump from a felled kauri tree, leafless, barkless, hollowed by time, and alive. Its roots were still wet, still pulsing faintly, not from its own photosynthesis, but from the surrounding trees. Its neighbors were feeding it through grafted roots, sharing water, sugars, minerals, keeping it alive. No clear advantage, no clear reason. The tree persists despite having no body, just a remnant, kept in circulation. Trees keep what they can, even when function fades, even when the form no longer resembles life. The concept of an expiration date does not apply easily to trees. They taper into stillness. They do not hurry to stop. Beneath the trees at dusk, all of this rests quietly. If you pause long enough, nothing seems to move. But that's only because it moves in years, not minutes. One root inching further into the soil. One cell dividing under bark. One tree deciding not to die, not yet. We can't fully explain how they do it, but they do. We can't fully explain how a tree can spread itself across 100 acres, wear 10,000 faces, and yet remain one. In the highlands of central Utah, there lives a single tree named Pando. But it doesn't look like a single tree. It looks like a forest. Thousands of slender trunks, stretching across more than 100 acres of land. Golden leaves, shimmering bark. Each trunk rises from the soil like its own tree, but all of them are connected beneath the surface by one continuous root system. Genetically, they are identical, not just similar, the same. Pando is what scientists call a clonal colony, an organism that spreads by growing new stems from a shared root structure. Each trunk is technically just one expression of the same life form. A single tree with tens of thousands of visible bodies. We can't fully explain how old it is. Some estimates suggest Pando has been alive for 10,000 years. Others suggest 80,000. It may be one of the oldest living things on Earth, but it doesn't look ancient. Its trunks come and go, each one living perhaps 100 years, then fading, while new ones sprout to take its place. The tree as a whole never stops growing. It endures by replacing itself. Each aspen stem rises for a while, lives its span, then dies. But below the ground, the root system endures. New shoots emerge from the same root web that has persisted for millennia. Like candles on a cake, the trunks come and go, but the flame remains lit. The body changes, the self continues. This kind of clonal growth isn't rare in plants, but the scale of Pando is unmatched. It challenges how we define an individual. We often think of a tree as what we see: a trunk, branches, leaves. But Pando suggests that identity can be broader. A single living presence can span time through regeneration. A grove of thousands, yet genetically one. We can't fully explain how Pando has lasted this long. Evolution should introduce mutations over time. Random errors in copying DNA, environmental stress, disease. Yet Pando persists. Its roots still push upward. Its shoots still rise. Some scientists suspect it has developed extraordinary resilience at the cellular level. Others think its sheer redundancy, tens of thousands of stems, may help dilute any single weakness. But it's still uncertain how it's evaded senescence for so long. Even the continuity of its structure is debated. Some parts may have died back and regrown. Climate shifts have altered its range. It's possible that Pando has been interrupted and renewed multiple times across eras. But the core genetic identity remains intact. It remains itself, even as it changes. We can't fully explain what finally limits a tree like this. Is it age? Is it environmental disruption? Pando is currently declining in some areas, as grazing animals eat young shoots before they can mature. In that sense, it's not age that threatens it, but interruption. A rhythm broken, a silence in the pattern. What it reveals, though, is a quiet kind of immortality, not the defiance of death, but its dispersal. Each part of Pando is temporary, but the whole persists. One root system echoing itself into the future. When the wind moves through an aspen grove, it feels like one being shivering in its sleep. Leaves flicker in unison, light catches and breaks, and the sound is like 1,000 whispers. Yet they may be the whispers of a single voice, scattered across space, stretched across time. We can't fully explain how a single tree becomes a forest, but sometimes it does. We can't fully explain how a tree without ears or eyes can know what's happening to the one beside it. Some trees, when they're wounded, don't just react, they warn others. In parts of southern Africa, giraffes browse acacia trees by stripping their leaves. But the moment the leaves are damaged, the acacia releases ethylene gas into the air. Within minutes, nearby acacia trees, untouched, begin to change. They draw in the signal and start flooding their own leaves with bitter tannins. The giraffes soon move on. And not just a few steps away. They've been seen walking hundreds of meters, often upwind, as if avoiding a line of trees already on alert. We know the chemistry. Ethylene is a simple molecule, easily spread by air. But what remains unclear is the selectivity. The trees closest to the damage respond first, but not all of them. Some trees farther away react sooner than nearby ones. Some don't respond at all. There's no clear distance rule. It's not just diffusion. Something else is happening. And it's not just giraffes. When insects begin chewing on a willow, that willow can produce volatile organic compounds that float across the air to other willows, or even to different species. A maple may alter its chemical profile after receiving cues from a birch. Pines signal each other with terpenes, molecules that also give them their smell. What trees are saying to one another isn't language, it's chemistry. But the patterns hint at something more complex than mere reaction. Some trees change their defense levels without any visible attack. Others hold off entirely, even when surrounded by danger. The decisions aren't random, but we haven't yet uncovered the rules. Some researchers suspect that each species, or even each tree, has its own sensitivity threshold. Others think the signals are layered, with some compounds masking or amplifying others, like chords in a scent-based conversation. But there's no nervous system here, no brain, no conscious planning, just molecules moving through air, roots and bark, and responses that sometimes seem faster or more specific than they should be. It raises questions about individuality, about boundaries. If one tree's distress can shape another's chemistry, where does one end and the next begin? In a densely planted grove, responses can ripple. A single damaged leaf leads to changes in trees meters away. Those trees may then pass on the signal further, like a quiet alarm drifting through wood and wind. But the signal fades, the urgency dissipates, and the system resets, waiting again in stillness. We can't fully explain why some trees appear to ignore the warning, or why some false alarms trigger stronger reactions than real attacks. The system works, but we don't yet know why. A tree doesn't hear the way we do, but it listens. Through air, through roots, through the thin film of moisture on its leaves, through shifts in chemistry we can barely measure. It receives, it adapts, and when it speaks, it does so without words. It speaks in tannins, in terpenes, in tiny invisible signals that drift between branches like messages in a language we haven't learned. We can't fully explain how a tree warns another, but it happens quietly and often while no one is watching. We can't fully explain how a tree prepares for harm before the harm arrives. In the stillness of a grove, nothing seems urgent. No running, no flight, no armor. But beneath the bark, some trees appear to ready themselves not after injury, but before it, as if they sense what's coming. In laboratory studies, researchers have exposed tree roots to subtle changes, vibrations, temperature shifts, or trace chemical signals in the air. In many cases, the tree responds before anything visible occurs. Chemical pathways activate. Hormonal changes begin, defense compounds increase, and no leaf has been touched. What are they responding to? One experiment placed caterpillars on the leaves of a single plant while shielding nearby ones from all physical contact. Yet within hours, untouched plants began ramping up their tannin production, the same bitter chemicals used to deter herbivores. Not only did they react, they did so faster than trees that had been physically damaged. Something about the signal felt more urgent than injury itself. We can't fully explain how trees interpret these warnings. Theories include volatile compounds released by saliva, microbial cues from insect feet, or even acoustic vibrations from chewing. In one study, trees exposed to the sound of caterpillars munching, but with no insects present, increased their chemical defenses. They didn't need to see or feel, they just needed to hear. But how does a tree hear without ears? Some researchers suggest mechanosensitive proteins in plant cells may detect vibrations in leaves or stems. Others think the structure of the tree, its internal water columns and rigid cell walls, acts as a kind of natural amplifier, but we haven't confirmed the mechanism. Trees don't have neurons, they don't have eardrums, and yet they respond. In the wild, this becomes even harder to trace. Forests are filled with noise, wind, rain, birds, insects, footsteps, thunder. Distinguishing signal from background is something even our most advanced machines struggle with. But trees appear to do it, filtering out constant movement and reacting only to certain sounds, certain chemicals, certain patterns. It's not just insects. Some trees change behavior in response to dry conditions before any drought symptoms appear. Leaf pores close. Water retention increases. Growth slows. All in anticipation of something that hasn't fully arrived. These aren't just delayed reactions to stress. In some cases, they begin before measurable soil moisture drops. It's as if the tree recognizes the pattern, the tension in the air, the rhythm of light and heat, and adjusts accordingly. We can't fully explain how trees calculate this risk. Unlike animals, they can't move away. They have to stay where they are, and so they seem to invest in anticipation, in subtle, often invisible shifts that might give them just enough of an edge to survive what comes next. In ecology, this is sometimes called priming, a kind of biochemical memory where a plant exposed to a mild stress reacts more quickly or strongly when the real threat appears later. Priming can last for days, weeks, or even through seasons. In some species, seedlings inherit this state from their parents. A memory of hardship passed not through teaching, but through tissue. But even here, we don't know how the information is stored. There's no memory center, no archive, just molecules moving, cells preparing, an old wisdom not yet mapped. A tree, from the outside, appears unbothered. Its branches sway, its leaves glow in the sun, but deep inside, its chemistry is in motion, watching, listening, testing the air. We can't fully explain how a tree reads the future, or if that's even what it's doing. But when you look closely, it is often already in motion long before we would expect it to be. Not reacting, responding. Slowly, gently, before anything happens at all. Some of the most complex behavior in trees happens underground, in silence, in the dark. Beneath the roots, there's another network. Not made of wood, but of fungi. long, thin threads called hyphae, which weave through the soil in microscopic abundance. When these threads meet the roots of a tree, something begins to grow between them. A partnership, a mesh, an exchange. This structure is known as a mycorrhizal network, a living bridge between trees and fungi. The fungi help trees gather nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen from the soil. In return, the trees send down sugars made from photosynthesis. It's a trade, happening cell by cell, invisible from above. But over time, this trade becomes a pattern, and eventually, a pattern becomes a web. One fungal network can link dozens, even hundreds of trees. It doesn't just follow one route, it stretches between them, connecting individuals of the same species, and sometimes across species entirely. A pine and a birch, a maple and a fir, all joined by threads too fine to see. We understand the chemistry of the exchange, but not its logic. Some trees share more than others. Some give carbon to neighbors. Others appear to receive more than they give. And the pattern changes depending on season, stress, light, and location. In some cases, older trees feed younger ones. In others, the flow reverses. Even damaged or dying trees may send their remaining nutrients outward before they fade, as if the tree is making a choice. Researchers have found that these networks can transmit more than food. They pass chemical signals that trigger defenses in neighboring trees. They may even communicate what kind of threat is nearby: insect, drought, or disease. But how far the signal can travel, how it changes along the way, and how it's interpreted by different trees, that's still uncertain. Some scientists refer to this system as the Wood Wide Web, a living, shifting network of resource exchange and chemical information. But unlike the digital web, this one moves slowly, thoughtlessly, without a central hub, or maybe with many hubs. Certain trees, older or larger, seem to act as key connectors. In some cases, when these hub trees are removed, the network collapses. The term mother tree is sometimes used to describe these older trees that appear to support seedlings around them, not just by proximity, but by direction, sending more to kin, favoring their own kind. But even that concept is under debate. Is it nurturing or just physiology? We know what moves. We're still unsure why it moves the way it does. No one has mapped the full network of a forest. It would require tracing millions of threads through countless cubic meters of soil. Even in controlled experiments, the system resists full visibility, like trying to diagram wind, but pieces of it reveal themselves. In dry seasons, a shaded tree will sometimes receive water or carbon from one in full sun. In winter, deciduous trees may receive reserves from evergreens. In dense groves, saplings survive in deep shade thanks to sugars delivered underground, sugars they did not make themselves. This isn't charity, but it also isn't simple competition. Trees are not isolated towers. They are porous, responsive, linked to one another through something older than language, older than roads, older than memory. We've known about mycorrhiza for over a century, but the scope and the subtlety continues to unfold. What began as a root fungus handshake may be something more complex. A nervous system without neurons, a marketplace without prices, a conversation in chemical grammar. A tree may stand alone in shape, but rarely in function. beneath your feet, its roots may be touching the roots of 10 others. And beneath those roots, fungi reaching farther still. The tree is not alone. It never was. Some trees support others even when there's nothing to gain. Even when there's no sunlight, no leaves, no return on the exchange. A few years ago, researchers hiking through a forest in New Zealand found something unusual. A tree stump, wide, flat, long dead by appearance, still alive. It had no branches, no leaves, no way to photosynthesize, no clear function. And yet, when they measured the roots, they found water, flow, subtle rhythmic pulses. The stump was still metabolically active, its cells alive, breathing slowly. Where was the water coming from? It wasn't rainfall, it wasn't dew. The stump was connected underground to living trees nearby, trees of the same species, their roots interwoven with its own. And through those roots, it was being fed. Water, nutrients, even sugars. Kept alive, cell by cell, by others. This wasn't an isolated finding. Similar root-grafted stumps have been found across multiple species. Douglas fir, kauri, spruce, beech. Always the same story. No visible life above ground. But below, a faint persistence. A system refusing to let go. Why? We know how root grafts form. When two roots grow close enough, they can merge. The vascular tissue blends. Fluids can move between them. But why a healthy tree would keep supplying a non-functioning stump remains unclear. There's no obvious evolutionary advantage. The stump can't reproduce. It doesn't shade the soil. It doesn't share resources back. It simply persists, supported, maintained. Like a limb the tree no longer uses, but never amputates. Some ecologists suggest these grafts began when both trees were alive, and the connection remained even after one died back. Others think the graft may benefit the larger tree indirectly, by stabilizing soil, or by buffering root systems during stress. But these are partial explanations, hypotheses, not conclusions, and the behavior seems to vary. Some trees cut off the grafted partner once it stops contributing. Others keep them going indefinitely, not just for days, but for decades. It doesn't follow a strict pattern. In some species, these grafts form between close relatives. In others, they cross between individuals that are genetically distinct. Even unrelated trees have been found with shared root flows. There's no universal rule. We understand the plumbing, not the purpose. From a human perspective, the impulse to keep something alive, even when it no longer serves a function, can feel emotional. It isn't. Trees don't feel in the way we do, but the persistence is real, and it blurs the boundary between the individual and the collective. In this way, the stump is not quite dead, and the tree supporting it is not just itself. It is part of a living mesh, not just a being, but a node. In northern forests, you can sometimes find living stumps whose centers have rotted entirely, hollowed out, home to insects, to moss, to soil. And still, a thin ring of cambium, the living tissue, remains intact around the outside, a green line pulsing faintly under the bark, life holding on at the margin, even when the visible tree has fallen, even when nothing remains above. This isn't a story about cooperation. Not exactly. It's not a fable. There's no moral to extract. But it is a pattern, and one we haven't fully explained. Not all trees do this. Many stand entirely alone. Many sever ties when stressed, but others don't. Some keep sharing, some hold on. Even in the absence of reciprocity, even without benefit. That may be the most quietly startling part of it all, the lack of a reason. We tend to look for purpose, for logic. But in the forest, logic is often soft-edged. Purposes overlap. Costs and benefits drift. And beneath it all, trees continue, slowly, steadily, feeding stumps, maintaining husks, passing water to what no longer drinks, keeping parts alive for no measurable gain. Perhaps it's just residual flow. Perhaps the tree doesn't notice. Or perhaps noticing is the wrong framework altogether. A tree is not a strategist. It doesn't choose in the way we mean, but it responds. And sometimes its response is to continue. Even when the feedback fades, even when the partner is gone. We don't have a full explanation, just the evidence, just the stump, still wet, still drawing from something nearby, still alive. Even without a brain, a tree can carry the memory of harm for years, maybe decades, maybe longer. Some memories in trees are easy to see. The rings of a trunk hold stories in color and width. A fire year, a flood year, a long winter that slowed the tree's growth to a near standstill. Scientists read these rings like timelines. A wide ring might mark a warm, wet season. A narrow one, a drought. A scar, a lightning strike. These are the physical traces of what happened, but some memories are stranger. They don't show up in shape. They show up in behavior. A tree injured by insects may grow differently the next year, not just in damaged areas, but throughout its structure. Branch angles shift, buds form in unusual places, leaf chemistry changes, and this altered state can persist even when the original injury is long gone. Sometimes the tree becomes more cautious, producing more defensive compounds than before, or changing its flowering schedule. Other times, the response seems exaggerated, as if the tree expects the harm to return. We don't use the word memory lightly, but researchers have documented long-term physiological changes in the trees that resemble memory. Not as thoughts, but as persistent, state-dependent shifts in function. In oaks and beeches, for example, caterpillar attacks can cause a delayed reaction that doesn't appear until the following spring. When new leaves emerge, they're already producing higher levels of tannins. The insects are gone, but the chemistry remains altered, as if the tree remembers being eaten. One study exposed poplar trees to stress chemicals without actual damage. The next generation of leaves, months later, still showed heightened defense levels. No injury had occurred, just the impression of threat, and that impression lingered. We don't know where this memory is stored. There's no brain, no central system, just cells, hormones, and signaling pathways that somehow retain the experience of stress and convert it into long-term change. Some scientists believe it happens at the epigenetic level, chemical tags that attach to DNA and alter gene expression without changing the underlying code. These tags can persist through seasons, sometimes even across generations. A tree's offspring may inherit the residue of its parents' experience. In this way, memory becomes biology. There's also physical memory in wood itself. When a tree bends under snow or wind, it can form reaction wood. Cells built differently, designed to resist compression or pull. Once formed, this tissue remains, holding the shape of what the tree once endured. Over time, the shape becomes part of the tree. A lean in one direction, a twist in the trunk, the memory of pressure made permanent. And sometimes, memory shows up in the way a tree heals. A scar doesn't just close, it reorganizes the tissues around it. Some trees grow thicker bark in areas that were once wounded, even if the threat is no longer present. They reinforce what's already sealed. Other trees stop healing altogether. In extremely stressed trees, the system can go silent, entering a kind of defensive dormancy where growth halts and wounds remain unsealed. It's not surrender, it's preservation. The tree waits. We can't fully explain how these decisions are made. What determines whether a tree grows through a wound or around it? Whether it becomes more aggressive in its defenses or more conservative? The same species may respond differently under different conditions. Even genetically identical trees can form different memories. And then there are the rings. Every year, another circle, another layer. But these rings don't just track time. They absorb experience. Fire years darken them. Drought years shrink them. In some species, ring patterns synchronize across entire regions, reflecting shared weather, shared pressure. But even within a single tree, anomalies appear. Years when something happened, but the cause isn't visible. A tree carries that year forever, not as a thought, as wood. There's something quietly powerful in this. A being that does not move, that does not flee, still remembers what happened to it, and not with fear or sorrow, just with change. Trees do not dwell, they adjust. Their memory is not emotional, it is physical, structural, chemical. A layer added, a pattern shifted, a growth redirected, and that memory shapes everything they do next. In a clearing, an old pine leans east, its trunk curved from a storm long past. New needles grow in all directions, but the lean remains. A choice made by pressure, a shape dictated by years. Not just damage, memory. We still don't fully understand how long this memory lasts, or whether trees can forget. But the marks are everywhere. A tree remembers in the way it grows, in the shape it holds, in the way it continues, slightly changed, but still rooted, still reaching, quietly holding the shape of what once touched it. A tree is supposed to need light. That's what defines it. Green leaves, sunlight, photosynthesis, turning energy from the sky into growth. But in some forests, deep beneath the canopy, trees grow where light never reaches. Pale, thin, almost ghost-like, and alive. In these places, young seedlings emerge in full shade. Not for hours, for years, sometimes a decade or more. They are shaded by tall parents, pressed under thick layers of leaves. No direct sunlight ever touches them. They are alive, but barely. This is known as the understory, the layer of life beneath the upper canopy. And it's a hard place to survive. Light can be less than 1% of what reaches the forest top. Most plants wouldn't last a week under those conditions, but some trees do. How? The answer reveals something we still don't fully understand. Carbon carbon sharing between trees. Some of the saplings in the understory survive not by photosynthesizing, but by receiving carbon from older trees nearby. Through underground networks, nutrients and sugars are passed from parent to seedling. Not once, but repeatedly. Not as a one-time gift, but as a stream. This process is possible thanks to mycorrhizal fungi, the same networks mentioned earlier. These fine threads attach to the roots of both old and young trees, forming bridges between them. Through these bridges, carbon, the basic fuel of life, can be sent directly into the tissues of a tree that hasn't made any for itself. It's like photosynthesis by proxy. We've measured this in the lab. Using carbon isotopes, scientists can trace where sugars go. They've watched carbon move from one tree to another, uphill, downhill, across meters of soil, and sometimes from a tree in full sun to a seedling in complete darkness. We know it happens, but we don't fully understand why. In some cases, it seems to be a parent-offspring relationship. A large tree supports its own genetic young until they can access light on their own. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the trees are unrelated, sometimes different species. Sometimes the recipient seedling never escapes the shade. It remains dependent for years, and still, it is kept alive. These young trees are often called advanced regeneration. They are a kind of patient future, waiting beneath the canopy for an opening, a lightning strike, a fallen trunk, a broken branch, a patch of sun, and when it comes, they're ready. They grow fast. They've been preparing. But even those that never reach the light remain metabolically active. Root growth, bark thickening, cell repair, all happening without self-made energy, just a steady stream of shared sugars. And that raises a question. What is a tree if it can't make its own food? Not all trees do this. Some seedlings die quickly in shade. Others enter what researchers call a carbon deficit, consuming more than they produce. And in many ecosystems, that means death. But in these networks, death doesn't always come when expected. Some seedlings remain alive underground without light for 10, 12, even 15 years. It's not a dormant state. It's not hibernation. It's growth, slow, fragile, but real. These saplings develop leaves that are thinner, larger, optimized for whatever dim light leaks through the canopy. They stretch, they reach, they wait. We can't fully explain the full economics of this system. There's no guarantee that a supported seedling will ever repay the network. And in some cases, trees seem to supply carbon to others who will never return the favor. There's no enforcement, no clear transaction. Some scientists think the fungal network itself plays a role, prioritizing flow to certain trees, managing distribution like a quiet, decentralized broker. Others believe it's simply passive diffusion, with no intentional control. But the patterns are uneven, selective, almost directed. And sometimes there is no photosynthesis at all. In extreme cases, entire plants known as mycoheterotrophs abandon photosynthesis completely. They tap into the fungal network directly, taking carbon that originally came from trees, passed through fungi, and now sustains a plant that has never seen the sun. Some of these are tiny herbs. Others are parasitic saplings. And still, they persist. They grow without light, without independence, fed by systems they do not contribute to. We don't have a full explanation, only the observation that trees and the organisms around them have found ways to survive in conditions that should be impossible. Light is the source of life, but in some corners of the forest, life has learned to grow by proxy, in patience, in shadow, in quiet exchange. A tree may wait half a lifetime before it sees the sky, and until then, it survives, underground, unseen, unfed by itself, and yet never alone. A tree has no eyes, no balance center, no spine, and yet it always knows which way is up. When a tree falls and doesn't die, something remarkable begins. Shoots rise from the trunk, roots deepen, and the body begins to bend, not randomly but purposefully, arcing back toward vertical. Over time, the entire structure may reshape itself. A leaning pine corrects, a twisted oak rebalances, slowly, deliberately, as if responding to an invisible thread pulling it upright. We call this response gravitropism, the ability of a plant to sense gravity and grow accordingly. Roots grow downward, stems grow up. It's one of the most fundamental abilities a plant has. But how it happens is still not fully understood. In animals, balance is managed by organs. Sensors in the ear, nerves feeding into the brain. But trees have none of this. No central processor, no sensory structures. Just cells, water, light. And yet, they respond with precision. Gravitropism begins at the cellular level. Certain cells in the growing tips of roots and stems contain small, dense bodies called statoliths. These are tiny, starch-filled organelles that settle with gravity, like snowflakes inside a level. As they move, they shift chemical signals, causing hormones like auxin to redistribute. When auxin builds up on one side of a shoot, it causes the cells on that side to elongate. The shoot bends away from the hormone concentration and up toward the sky. In roots, the same hormone works in reverse. It slows growth, bending the root downward. That's the working theory. But statoliths don't always behave the way we expect. In some experiments, even when these organelles are immobilized or altered, plants still respond to gravity. Auxin redistributes anyway. Growth patterns continue. It suggests there may be more than one sensing system, or that the existing model is incomplete. And then there's the scale. A seedling shows gravitropism quickly, within hours. But in trees, the response unfolds over years. A sapling knocked sideways by snow may take a full decade to return to vertical. A branch may twist itself slowly upward in spirals, not toward the sun, but away from the pull of gravity. These corrections form what botanists call reaction wood, specialized tissue that grows differently depending on the direction of stress. In conifers, the reaction wood forms below the bend, pushing the stem up. In hardwoods, it forms above the bend, pulling it upright. Two strategies, same result. We don't fully understand how trees determine how much correction is needed, or when to begin. Some respond to even slight tilts, others wait. Some continue correcting long after they've returned to vertical, overcompensating, twisting slightly the other way. In older trees, these movements become permanent. If you've ever seen a tree with a thick, curved trunk at the base that straightens above, that's the record of correction. The body of the tree remembering the direction it once leaned, and the effort it took to return. Even roots participate. If a seed germinates in loose soil and its orientation shifts, the roots will adjust. Some may twist or spiral. Others grow horizontally for a time before descending. It's not a simple matter of down and up. It's negotiation, gradual sensing, response shaped by the structure of the tree, the pressure in the cells, the resistance of the ground. Some species seem more sensitive than others. Beeches correct early, pines may delay. In wind-prone regions, trees may resist vertical correction entirely, growing at angles that minimize stress. A compromise between gravity and survival. And yet, the mechanism remains elusive. In space where gravity is absent, plants grow in confused spirals. Roots wander, shoots stretch in all directions. Even light, which usually helps guide growth, can't fully correct it. Without gravity, the code breaks. Orientation fails. So what trees are doing on Earth isn't automatic. It's a constant interpretation, an ongoing sense of the unseen. A tree doesn't know which way is up, but it acts as if it does. Over time, over seasons, over slow pulses of internal change, it reaches. And that reaching becomes its shape. In a grove of young trees bent by last winter's snow, the new growth arcs gently upward, like slow motion choreography. Silent, slow, perfectly directional. Each one responding not just to the sun or wind, but to the quiet pull beneath their roots. We don't fully understand how that pull is sensed, or how it's translated into form, but the shape remains, and it holds the story of correction deep within the wood. Every curve, every lean, every spiral, a response to something invisible and constant. There are patterns in trees that no one taught them to follow. Look closely at the way leaves emerge along a stem. Not directly opposite, not randomly spaced. Each new leaf appears at a slight angle from the last, rotated just enough to avoid casting shade on its neighbor. In many species, this rotation follows a near-perfect mathematical pattern, 137.5 degrees apart. This number isn't arbitrary. It's known as the golden angle, derived from the golden ratio, a proportion that appears in art, architecture, and ancient design. But trees use it without intention, without instruction. It emerges naturally, again and again. Pine cones, sunflower heads, the spiral arrangement of seeds inside a fir cone, the way branches curl outward on a young shoot. Many of these follow spiral counts that match the Fibonacci sequence, a series of numbers where each is the sum of the two before it. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. Count the spirals in one direction and the other, and you'll often find Fibonacci pairs, 8 and 13, or 13 and 21. The ratio between these numbers approaches the golden ratio, around 1.618. The same proportion that appears in seashells, galaxies, and waves. Why does this happen? The standard explanation is efficiency. Leaves arranged at these angles get more sunlight, with less overlap. Seeds packed this way fill space tightly, allowing more to grow in less area. Spirals reduce waste. they optimize. But optimization doesn't explain everything. First, not all plants use the same angle, and yet many still produce Fibonacci spirals. Second, these patterns arise not just in mature plants, but at the earliest stages of growth, when no sunlight has yet been absorbed. The pattern is built in before function begins. And third, trees don't have central control. There is no planner node inside a trunk assigning angles. Growth happens cell by cell, through pressure and expansion, at the growing tip known as the apical meristem. Each new structure emerges in response to chemical gradients, internal pressure, and space. So how does this pattern emerge? One idea is that hormones like auxin, which guide growth, naturally self-organize into spirals due to how they diffuse and inhibit each other. As new buds form, they repel others from forming too close, like magnetic fields spacing themselves out. Over time, the most stable configuration becomes a spiral. But that's still a model, a theory. It doesn't predict every case. It doesn't explain why Fibonacci numbers appear so consistently across unrelated species, or why certain sequences are more stable than others. And some patterns don't fit at all. Deviations occur. A pine cone with 14 spirals instead of 13. A tree whose leaf angles shift with age. In these cases, the form holds, but the ratio bends. We can map the patterns, but we haven't fully explained why the system leans toward beauty. It's tempting to assign meaning, to say the tree chooses the golden ratio. But it doesn't choose. It grows. And growth, shaped by constraints, creates form. Still, the recurrence remains uncanny. When a tree grows, it does so in pulses. The apical meristem at the tip produces cells that expand outward in all directions. As each new structure forms, a bud, a leaf, a bract, it is pushed aside slightly to make room for the next. The angle of this shift becomes self-reinforcing. A spiral begins, and from that spiral, the tree gains balance, distribution, stability, but also grace. There is no language for this, no encoded design, only matter responding to space, pressure meeting surface. And yet, out of this, a pattern forms. Predictable, elegant, familiar. The tree never measures, it never calculates. But somehow, in its structure, numbers appear. Not invented, revealed. Across a hillside of young pines, the cones hang in perfect silent spirals, each one shaped not by light or wind, but by the same strange mathematics that appears in hurricanes and horns. No one taught the tree to do this, and yet it does. In most living things, stress wears down the body. It frays tissue, shortens life, and speeds decay. But for some trees, stress appears to do the opposite. It preserves them. The oldest known trees on Earth, bristlecone pines, grow not in lush valleys or rain-drenched forests, but in harsh, rocky soil at high altitudes. Their habitat is dry, cold, windswept. The soil is thin, the nutrients sparse, and yet they endure. Not for centuries, for millennia. Some bristlecones are more than 5,000 years old. The paradox is clear. Trees in ideal growing conditions grow fast and die young. Trees in stress zones grow slowly but may outlive entire civilizations. The question is why? Part of the answer lies in growth rings. In stressful environments, trees produce narrow rings, thin layers of new wood each year. These tight rings are denser, less prone to rot, and mechanically stronger. The tree isn't rushing, it's conserving. In contrast, fast-growing trees, those with wide rings and rapid height gain, often develop weaker wood. They may reach the canopy quickly, but they fall more easily to wind, drought, pests, or disease. Still, this doesn't explain everything. Trees don't consciously choose to grow slowly, and yet, under duress, something changes in their biology. Photosynthesis slows, cell division becomes more efficient, repair mechanisms improve. The tree enters a mode of preservation, not just surviving, but optimizing its limited resources for the long term. Scientists call this the growth-longevity trade-off. But even this model has exceptions. Some stressed trees show no sign of trade-off at all. They maintain function year after year, with minimal signs of senescence, the gradual aging seen in animals. This raises a larger question. Do trees age in the way we think they do? Most animals follow a predictable arc: growth, maturity, decline. But in trees, decline is not guaranteed. Many species show no programmed senescence at all. Instead, they are limited more by external damage than by internal aging. And in places where external forces are minimal, or paradoxically, where hardship suppresses rapid growth, trees may linger indefinitely. In Patagonia, a species called Fitzroy cupressoides grows in mountain peat bogs, where soil is acidic and oxygen poor. It grows so slowly that its rings are nearly invisible without magnification. But the oldest among them is estimated to be over 5,400 years old, perhaps the oldest single tree by volume and age. The stress of the environment does not harm it. It shapes it. Another factor is size. Large trees accumulate damage more quickly. They attract lightning. They battle wind. They support more weight. But small, stunted trees, bonsai-like pines clinging to cliffs, often outlive their towering cousins. Their slow metabolism produces fewer mutations, less wear, less exposure. It's not just how long a tree lives, it's how slowly it lives. This slowness is protective. Trees under stress don't gamble. They close stomata sooner during drought. They invest more in root growth than height. They limit their leaf area to reduce transpiration. Each choice, subtle, but together it builds resilience. And the stress isn't always external. In some cases, internal limitations, like genetic mutations or constrained metabolism, also lead to longer life. Trees that grow unevenly or that divide cells more conservatively may avoid the cumulative damage that comes with speed. There's still no full explanation. We understand the correlation, not all the mechanisms, but the evidence is quiet and strong. A tree growing in a hard place may look fragile, bent, dry, half stripped of bark, but inside it is stable, measured, and deeply alive. In this way, stress becomes a kind of shield, not by making the tree stronger in the usual sense, but by slowing the pace of everything. Photosynthesis, division, risk. The tree doesn't fight the hardship, it leans into it. becomes a specialist, and in doing so, it avoids the crashes that come from abundance. In a high alpine plain, a bristlecone clings to a slope of pale stone. Snow has stripped one side of bark. Wind has sculpted its trunk into spirals. Its leaves are sparse. Its form half dead, but its core still grows. One thin ring at a time. That ring will be dense, tight, almost invisible. And next year, there will be another. We don't fully understand why hardship gives rise to longevity. But in trees it does, not as a triumph, but as a rhythm. Slow, steady, enduring. A tree doesn't just react to the weather. Sometimes it creates it. We often think of climate as something that happens to a tree. Rain falls, sunlight arrives, wind passes through. But trees are not passive. They don't merely receive weather. In quiet, continuous ways, they shape it. A single tree shades the ground beneath it, cools the air with moisture, slows the wind with its body. That's obvious. But scale that tree up into a grove, a forest, a continent-wide stretch of green, and something stranger begins to happen. Forests can change clouds. When a tree photosynthesizes, it opens tiny pores in its leaves called stomata. Through these pores, it releases oxygen, but also water vapor. A single large tree can move hundreds of liters of water into the air each day through this process, known as transpiration. That moisture doesn't vanish. It rises, joins with other invisible exhalations, warms, condenses, and often becomes clouds. In the Amazon rainforest, sometimes called the lungs of the planet, trees release so much moisture that they help create their own rainfall patterns. Satellites have observed cloud formation beginning not over rivers or lakes, but over dense forest regions. The trees are not simply recipients of rain. They are part of the engine that makes it. We know this, it's measurable, but we don't fully understand the feedback loops involved. When forests are cut, rainfall patterns often shift, not just nearby, but far away. Regions downwind become drier. In some cases, monsoon systems weaken. But how far this effect reaches and how long it lasts is still being studied. Climate models don't yet fully account for it, and the influence doesn't stop at water. Trees release aerosols, microscopic particles that rise into the air and act as seeds for cloud droplets. These can be pollen grains, volatile organic compounds, or fragments of leaf waxes. Once in the sky, they help determine the size, type, and behavior of clouds. In some regions, clouds over forests reflect more sunlight than those over grasslands. In others, they trap heat. The exact effect depends on altitude, particle type, forest density, and time of day. In other words, trees don't just breathe moisture, they breathe structure into the atmosphere. And sometimes, trees pull moisture in. In coastal redwood forests, fog is a major water source. The tall trees trap fog in their branches, absorbing droplets directly through their needles and funneling moisture down their bark. This process, known as fog drip, can provide up to 40% of the water budget for some ecosystems. Without the trees, the fog would pass through untouched. With them, it becomes rain that falls upward. This means trees don't only release weather, they catch it. On mountain slopes, cloud forests intercept passing mists. On islands, palm trees alter wind patterns enough to shape where storms land. In the tropics, deforestation has been linked to longer dry seasons. In boreal regions, large-scale tree planting has changed local snowfall patterns. And still, models lag behind. Many weather simulations treat vegetation as static, as land cover, not as participants. But in reality, trees are active players. They change albedo, surface reflectivity, surface roughness, humidity, pressure. A forest doesn't just sit in the weather, it interacts with it. Even individual species can make a difference. Some trees reflect more sunlight. Others absorb more heat. Some transpire more water. In plantations, uniformity changes wind behavior. In old-growth forests, diversity spreads the effect. We don't fully understand where the boundary lies between climate-shaping trees and trees shaping climate. The two are nested, interdependent, in motion. And because trees move slowly, their influence is often overlooked. But it is there, pulsing daily with every opening and closing of a stomata. Every breath of moisture, every drift of pollen into the sky. In the silence of a still grove, the air is not empty. It's thick with exchange, with trace particles, with vapor rising invisibly from the leaves. A tree touches the sky more often than we think, not with branches, but with breath. Not every tree grows straight. Some lean, some twist. Some arc sideways and never return. And in many cases, there's no clear reason why. We tend to think of shape as caused. A bent trunk must come from wind, a curve from slope, a spiral from damage. But there are trees in silent groves, far from cliffs or storms, that still take on unexpected forms. Twisted, bowed, reaching sideways into open air. Sometimes a tree leans toward light. That's called phototropism, and it's well understood. In dense forests, young saplings stretch toward sun gaps. In hedgerows, branches drift to where the canopy thins. But not every curve fits this explanation. There are trees that bend away from light, that grow in full sun, yet arc toward shadow, or that twist their trunks in slow spirals with no competition nearby. And their neighbors, even of the same species, grow straight. The forest is full of exceptions. Some trees develop asymmetry in their branches, heavier on one side, sparser on the other. Some begin upright, but arc over time into crescent shapes. Others grow two leaders, twin trunks from a single base, each moving in a different direction. These forms persist for decades, sometimes centuries. They're not corrections. They're settled paths. We know that trees respond to gravity, wind, and light. We've covered that. But we still don't fully understand the interactions between these forces, or how they produce certain shapes in the absence of visible stress. In coastal areas, wind shapes trees continuously. Salt air burns one side. Wind pressure reduces leaf size. Over time, a tree may become a windswept silhouette, branches streaming in one direction like smoke. These trees carry their weather in their shape. But even inland, away from constant breeze, we find similar forms. A spruce curving gently toward the north. A cedar growing in a full spiral from root to crown. No wind, no slope, no trauma, just shape. Scientists call this thigmomorphogenesis, the way trees respond to mechanical stimulation. Bending, vibration, motion. Even brief touches can affect growth direction. But in the wild, trees exposed to the same wind can grow in different ways. One straight, one coiled. The model doesn't predict well. There are also phenomena like spiral grain, where the fibers of a tree twist slightly as they grow upward. In some species, this spiral is subtle. In others, it becomes visible in the bark, long, slow corkscrews from base to tip. Sometimes left-handed, sometimes right, sometimes alternating up the trunk. We don't know what determines the direction. One theory is that spiral grain reduces stress from wind or torsion, distributing force more evenly through the trunk. Another suggests it improves water transport in tall trees. But then why don't all trees spiral? Why do some reverse direction mid-growth? Why does it vary not only by species, but between individuals? We don't have a full answer. And then there are crooked forests, places where entire groves of trees bend at the base before rising vertically. One famous example in Poland shows rows of pine trees with trunks that curve 90 degrees before straightening. The effect is eerie, sculptural, and unexplained. Some believe the trees were shaped intentionally when young. Others think it was snow load, or damage, or mutation. But no one has confirmed the cause. The trees have grown tall, healthy, and still curved. The shape remains. Shape is memory. Shape is response. But sometimes, shape is something else. A slow drift without a visible push. A curve without a pressure. A form without a reason. And in those cases, the tree becomes a question. Why did it lean that way? Why did it fork? Why did it spiral when its siblings stood straight? It's tempting to search for cause. But sometimes, the silence is part of the answer. The tree grew in the way it grew, not randomly, but not fully predictably either. In a clearing where no wind blows, a young beech arches west. Its trunk carries a soft S-curve. Its branches balance delicately, as if shaped by something more than just light or slope or storm. Its shape is quiet, but not neutral. It means something, even if we haven't deciphered what. We measure angle, we track growth, but we don't fully understand why some trees grow in forms that seem designed, not for efficiency, but for something quieter, something slower. The shape of silence, held in wood. There are trees that grow inside other trees, not beside, not around, inside. You might walk past them without noticing. A normal-looking trunk, a normal canopy. But inside that bark, inside that wood, lives a second tree, fed by it, wrapped in it, sometimes barely distinguishable from the one that holds it. These cases don't follow one rule. Some begin as parasites. Others start as accidents. Some are relatives. Others are strangers. But in every case, the boundary between self and other disappears. The most famous example is the strangler fig. A fig seed lands high in the branches of another tree, dropped by a bird or carried by wind. There, it sprouts. It sends roots downward, slow and delicate at first, wrapping around the host trunk. Over time, the fig grows stronger, Its roots reach the ground. Its canopy expands. Eventually, it surrounds the host entirely, using it as scaffolding, nourishment, shelter. The host may die, but not always. In some cases, the two trees grow together for decades, one inside the other, one outside the other, the distinction blurred. We can explain parts of this. The fig begins epiphytically, living on another plant, and later becomes independent. Its growth is opportunistic, its biology aggressive. But not all such fusions are predatory. In temperate forests, there are trees that fuse through a process called inosculation. When two branches or trunks of genetically compatible trees touch, their cambium layers, the thin tissue beneath the bark, can grow together. Over time, they share vascular tissue. Sap flows from one into the other. They become partially merged. Gardeners sometimes do this deliberately in grafting. A branch from one tree is joined to the trunk of another. If successful, the two become one organism, functionally, if not genetically. Fruit trees are often grown this way. One rootstock, many grafted varieties. Apples growing from different limbs, pears from another. But in the wild, these grafts happen on their own. A young tree growing close to another may press its bark against its neighbor. If both are flexible enough and not yet sealed with hard bark, the cambium connects. The trees become partially fused. Sometimes it's between siblings. Other times between unrelated trees. Occasionally, trees of different species join. We don't fully understand why some trees accept fusion and others reject it. In animals, the immune system usually prevents foreign tissue from surviving. But in trees, compatibility is a softer boundary. Some accept almost any graft. Others are highly selective. And the rules aren't simple. Two trees of the same species might refuse to fuse. Two of different species might succeed. Even within a species, environmental conditions seem to affect grafting success. Age, moisture, stress, season. There is no single algorithm that predicts who accepts whom. Inside a large, hollow tree, you may sometimes find another growing upward, a sapling rooted in the compost of decay. Its roots twist down through gaps in the trunk. Its branches stretch toward openings. It is held by the body of the older tree, shielded from wind, warmed by the sunlit bark. The host may be dying or not. The two trees are not fighting. They are entangled. Even stumps can be reactivated this way. A living tree may graft with the root of a nearby stump. Once connected, the stump, long dead, begins to show signs of water flow. Metabolism. The cambium moistens. Cells begin dividing. A remnant becomes a participant again. We don't fully understand how the host determines what to send, or whether there is any decision at all. The graft behaves like a shared organ, a bridge. Fluid flows in both directions. The boundary dissolves. And when that happens, a tree no longer ends where its roots do. Its body may contain others. Its bark may carry a stranger's breath. In groves, where inosculation is common, trunks may fuse into loops. Trees form arches. Ropes of bark braid together. These forms aren't decorative. They weren't shaped by human hands. They just happened. Slowly, quietly. One tree pressing into another until neither could tell where the other began. In these places, identity becomes soft. A tree may be itself, and also more than itself, living inside each other, not as a threat, but as a structure, held, fed, shared. Long before the air cools or the winds shift, a tree begins to change, not in its branches, not in shape, but deep inside, in chemistry, in silence, in preparation for something that hasn't happened yet. In temperate climates, most trees adjust their leaf chemistry as seasons change. In autumn, they stop producing chlorophyll, the green pigment that captures light. As chlorophyll fades, other pigments surface. Carotenoids in yellow, anthocyanins in red. These are not decorations. They're the tree's final adjustments before winter. Changes that conserve energy, strengthen defenses, or prepare tissues for the cold. We used to think this was purely reactive, that trees waited for temperatures to drop or frost to arrive, and then responded. But that's not what happens. Trees begin this shift weeks before the first cold day. They don't wait for winter. They anticipate it. How? The primary signal isn't temperature, it's photoperiod, the length of daylight. As days shorten in late summer, trees measure the fading light, hour by hour, and with remarkable consistency, they begin to adjust, not based on weather, but on light alone. This process is called photoperiodic response, and it governs far more than just fall color. Buds form, leaf drop begins, roots slow, all triggered by shifts in light, often subtle ones, changes imperceptible to us. But to the tree, these changes are everything. A clock, a countdown, and this response is not passive. Trees don't simply react to shorter days. They act in advance of environmental stress. In some species, chemical changes begin as much as a month before the first frost. In others, fall defenses ramp up even when temperatures stay warm, triggered solely by daylight change. It's not just a seasonal rhythm, it's anticipation. But how does a tree measure day length? It has no eyes, no nervous system, and yet, within its leaves and shoots, are light-sensitive molecules, phytochromes, that change shape depending on the type and intensity of light. These molecules shift as day length changes, triggering cascades of chemical signals that affect hormones, metabolism, and gene expression. The system is elegant, but not fully understood. Even in controlled environments, where light, water, and temperature are held constant, trees still enter seasonal patterns. Some seem to know what time of year it is based on internal rhythms alone, even without external cues. We've begun to uncover circannual rhythms in trees, internal clocks that repeat on roughly yearly cycles, even in the absence of sunlight. Like hibernation in animals, these rhythms suggest a kind of built-in memory, not conscious, but persistent. And some trees are more sensitive than others. In high-latitude species, the shift toward dormancy is precise. A single week of altered light can trigger massive hormonal changes. In equatorial species, where day length varies little, trees still respond, but often to rain cycles or subtle spectral shifts in sunlight. Each species tunes itself to a different clock, but there are anomalies. Some trees change their pigments too early, others wait too long. In recent years, with shifting climates, certain populations have begun responding out of sync with weather. entering dormancy during mild autumns, or failing to bud during warm springs. The light signals remain the same, but the environment has changed. And still, the tree listens to the light. It doesn't guess. It doesn't test. It begins to change, trusting a rhythm older than weather, older than frost, older than names for the seasons. This is why you may see a maple glowing red in late August, long before the air cools, or a beech dropping leaves during a warm October. The signal was received. The clock has turned, but the response isn't uniform. Even on the same hillside, two trees may differ. One full of color, one still green. Their clocks are individual, influenced by age, stress, history. We can't always predict which will move first. We call them phantom leaves. Those early changes, those chemical shifts before the world demands them. They are the tree's way of reaching into time. Not forward with will, but inward with rhythm. A memory of light, a trust in what comes next. In some forests, it doesn't need to rain for a tree to drink. Water appears without sound, not falling, not flowing, just drifting through the air, a thin mist, a low cloud, a silence made of moisture. This is fog. And in places where fog is frequent, trees have learned to drink from it. They don't wait for rain to soak the soil. They don't rely only on roots. Instead, they draw water directly from the air, through leaves, needles, and even bark. A process called foliar uptake, or more broadly, fog interception. You can see it on coastal cliffs, where redwoods catch mist from the sea, on mountain slopes, where cloud forests disappear into the sky, or in islands and deserts, where rain is rare but fog is regular. The method is simple in appearance, but complex in function. Fog condenses on the surfaces of trees. Tiny droplets collect on needles or hairs. These droplets coalesce, grow heavier, and drip down branches, down bark, down to the ground. This is called fog drip, and it can mimic rainfall. In some ecosystems, it accounts for 30 to 50% of the total water input. But even more surprising is what happens before the drip. Some trees don't wait for the droplets to fall. They absorb water directly through their surfaces, not just through pores, but across entire leaf surfaces, or even through the outer layers of bark. In these cases, the fog becomes internal before it even reaches the soil. Redwoods are known for this. During summer droughts, when soil moisture is low, they continue thriving, not because of rain, but because of fog. Their needles are finely structured to capture and hold mist, and their tissues are adapted to take it in. Studies using isotopically labeled water show that fog absorbed through foliage moves into the tree's internal water system. It travels downward. It rehydrates tissues. It even reaches roots. In effect, the tree waters itself from the top down. We understand the outlines of this, but not the full mechanism. How water passes through the cuticle, the waxy surface of leaves, remains a question. In some species, specialized pores help. In others, it may be pressure, chemistry, or structure. The variety is wide, and the process is not fully mapped. Some trees are more efficient than others. In one study of cloud forests, trees with hairy leaves absorbed more fog than smooth-leaved neighbors. In other studies, bark texture made a difference. Certain mosses growing on bark also helped, acting like sponges, holding fog in place longer for absorption. And these adaptations aren't uniform. In the same forest, different species may capture fog in different ways. Some maximize drip, others maximize absorption, still others do both. There's no single fog strategy, but in every case the result is the same: water entering the system without touching the roots. A second method of hydration: a quiet reservoir in the air. In some regions, fog sustains entire ecosystems. Coastal redwood forests of California rely heavily on summer fog. Without it, the soil dries, understory plants wilt, and the trees themselves show signs of stress. In desert islands like the Canaries or parts of Chile, trees trap fog that then sustains the ground vegetation around them, creating microclimates of moisture in otherwise dry landscapes. These forests are known as fog oases, places where life persists not because of rainfall, but because of what the air carries. And yet, this process is fragile. Climate change is reducing fog in many areas. Warmer seas, changed wind patterns, less coastal mist, and where the fog disappears, the forests begin to change, slowly, quietly, from the top down. We don't fully understand how much fog is needed to sustain a forest, or how different species will respond as patterns shift. Some may adapt, others may fade, but the image remains: a tree standing in still air, no rain, no storm, and yet moisture beads on its skin, travels inward, becomes part of the trunk, the branches, the leaves. It drinks from the invisible, not by force, not by movement, just by being there when the cloud passes through. Before the sun rises, some trees are already awake. Not in the way we wake, no eyes, no stretching limbs, but in chemistry, in rhythm, in quiet biological motion. Long before the first light touches their leaves, a tree begins shifting its behavior, preparing. This readiness isn't triggered by sunlight itself. It begins in darkness. In one study, researchers monitored trees throughout the night using heat sensors and leaf angle tracking. They found that hours before dawn, the trees began opening their stomata, the small pores on the underside of leaves that control gas exchange. Water began moving upward. Enzymes involved in photosynthesis ramped up. The tree, it seemed, was anticipating the light. But how? Even in controlled environments with no external cues. No temperature shift, no breeze, no sunlight. Trees still follow these patterns. Their internal processes repeat on a cycle of approximately 24 hours, even in total darkness. This is the signature of a circadian rhythm, an internal clock that guides timing and behavior. Circadian rhythms are common in animals. Sleep cycles, feeding times, hormone release. They're usually tied to light and darkness. But in trees, these rhythms occur without sensory organs. There are no eyes, no central brain, no switch to flip when morning comes. And yet, the rhythm holds. In birch trees, the leaves droop gently during the night and rise again in the morning. This movement is subtle, just a few centimeters, but measurable. When the same trees are kept in constant darkness, the movement continues on the same schedule for days, This means the cycle isn't just a response. It's internal. Inside the cells of plants are molecular timekeepers, feedback loops of proteins and genes that rise and fall in concentration over a 24-hour cycle. These loops influence everything from sugar production to growth hormones to water movement. They help the tree stay in sync with the world, even when the world isn't offering cues. And timing matters. Photosynthesis is more efficient when it's prepared in advance. If a tree opens its stomata just as light arrives, it begins gathering energy immediately. If it waits until after sunrise, it wastes precious minutes. In competitive environments, where light is filtered, fleeting, or partial, that edge can make a difference. But the clock does more than just greet the sun. At night, trees shift into recovery mode. They repair damage, they store sugars, they redistribute nutrients. These processes are also timed, not simply on during darkness, but modulated across the night in patterns that repeat. In some species, root growth peaks in the early hours before dawn. In others, cell division slows as the sky begins to brighten. What's mysterious is how flexible and robust these clocks are. They're not fixed like timers. They can adjust to seasonal changes, to shifts in light and temperature. But they're also not fully plastic. They hold a steady rhythm even when the outside world becomes unpredictable. And different parts of the tree may follow different clocks. Leaves operate on one cycle, roots on another. Flowers may time their opening with precision, coordinated not just by light, but by internal alignment. These layered clocks interact, synchronize, and sometimes drift, like an orchestra playing variations on a theme. We understand the mechanics in part, the genes involved, the molecules that rise and fall, but we don't fully understand how these clocks are set, or how trees coordinate multiple rhythms without a central nervous system. And we've only recently discovered that some trees may anticipate events even days in advance. Certain species begin a drought preparation, closing stomata, altering hormone levels before soil moisture drops. Not in reaction, but in expectation, based on prior patterns, based on memory. Is this an extension of the circadian clock? A longer rhythm layered on top? Or something else entirely? We don't yet know. But what's clear is this: a tree is not waiting for the world to act. It is already moving, already measuring, already adjusting to a light that hasn't yet arrived. Its silence is full of timing. Its stillness is not a pause. It's preparation. By the time the first ray of sun touches the canopy, the tree is already at work, opening, breathing, rising toward the day, not because it sees the light, because it remembers when it comes. Inside a tree, water doesn't flow in a constant stream. It pulses, not like a river, not like a faucet, but in soft, rhythmic surges, faint, spaced, almost musical in their regularity. Each pulse moves upward through vessels in the trunk, carrying water from roots to leaves. It happens slowly, quietly, continuously. We used to assume it was steady, that once water entered a tree, it flowed upward at a consistent rate, driven by evaporation of the leaves, what's known as transpiration pull. But when researchers began listening more closely, using sensors that detect minute pressure changes, they discovered something else. The flow is not smooth. It comes in waves. These waves occur throughout the day, often in synchrony with light and humidity. But even at night, when transpiration slows, the pulses continue. Small surges, stops, surges again. Some studies suggest these patterns resemble a heartbeat, not in sound, but in rhythm. In birch trees, for example, pressure sensors have detected regular cycles of contraction and expansion in the trunk every couple of hours. These movements are tiny, fractions of a millimeter, but enough to change the speed and pressure of water transport. The mechanism is not fully understood. Unlike animals, trees have no central pump, no heart. Water movement is largely passive, a combination of root pressure, capillary action, and evaporation. But these pulses suggest that something more is happening, that the tree is adjusting its internal movement in response to conditions, or perhaps in cycles of its own making. One hypothesis is that roots act like a slow-motion heart, building pressure periodically as they absorb water, then releasing it upward in controlled bursts. Another idea is that cellular swelling and shrinking in the trunk, due to changes in sugar concentration, may produce these pulses as a side effect. But neither model explains the regularity. The pulses are often timed and follow a 2-hour cycle. Others, a 24-hour pattern that matches circadian rhythms. The synchronization implies coordination, even without a central organ to do the coordinating. And it's not just one tree at a time. In some forests, trees of the same species show similar sap movement rhythms, even when separated by distance. Whether this is due to shared environmental conditions or some form of chemical synchronization remains unclear. The water's path inside a tree moves through structures called xylem vessels, long, narrow tubes made from hollowed cells. These vessels stretch from roots to crown. When water is drawn upward, it does so under tension, pulled by evaporation in the leaves. This creates a negative pressure column, like drinking through a straw. But that column is fragile. Bubbles can form. Air can interrupt the flow, a problem known as cavitation. And yet, trees repair these gaps. How they detect, isolate, and refill embolized vessels is still under investigation. Some theories suggest acoustic signals, tiny clicks or pops as air enters a vessel, may trigger responses. Some researchers have recorded these sounds directly, which means, in some sense, a tree speaks through its sap, not in language, but in rhythm, in pulses, in internal patterns that rise and fall, invisible from outside. You can't hear them with ears, but with the right sensors, the tree's body tells you what it's doing, how it's moving water, when it's stressed, when it's awake. It's not music, but it has timing. Some trees pulse more in the morning, others in the afternoon. During drought, the rhythm changes. During recovery, it changes again. These patterns are so consistent that some researchers believe they could be used as early indicators of forest health, a stethoscope for the woods. Still, we don't fully understand why sap pulses instead of flowing continuously, or how widespread these patterns are, or whether they serve a deeper purpose beyond water movement. But the idea lingers. Inside a tree, something is moving, not just rising, but pulsing, as if the tree breathes differently than we thought, as if it carries a rhythm buried in wood, shaped by time. If you could sit within a trunk and wait and feel, you might sense it. The slow rise, the tiny pause, the pulse that comes next, a heartbeat made of water and wood and silence. A seedling rises in the dark soil. It's surrounded by others, siblings, strangers, roots pressing close, leaves just beginning to unfold. And from the very beginning, it doesn't grow in a straight line. It adjusts. It curves. Sometimes it holds back. Sometimes it accelerates. Sometimes it turns away from a nearby shoot, not because of light, not because of wind, but because of who that neighbor is. Some trees seem to choose where, how, and whether to grow, not randomly, but selectively. In the presence of kin, some seedlings slow their upward push, reduce competition, or angle themselves to avoid shading others. In contrast, when growing near non-relatives, the same species may grow taller, faster, and more competitively. This behavior has been observed in laboratory and field studies. In one experiment, Douglas fir seedlings grew more slowly when placed near siblings and more aggressively when surrounded by unrelated firs. Their root systems also changed, expanding more widely near strangers but limiting spread near kin. Another study on beech trees showed that root grafts, natural fusions between roots, were more likely to occur between genetically related individuals. Among strangers, these connections were rare or absent. Somehow, the trees appeared to recognize genetic similarity. We understand what happens. We don't yet understand how. Trees have no eyes, no noses, no brain to sort kin from competitor. But something in their chemistry, perhaps signals pass through roots or shared fungi or exudates in the soil, seems to inform them. The question is, how do they detect genetic identity without a nervous system? Some theories suggest that root exudates, the chemical substances secreted by roots, carry identifying signatures. Each tree releases a cocktail of sugars, amino acids, and secondary compounds into the soil. These may act like chemical fingerprints. Neighboring roots could detect similarities or differences in these signals. Another hypothesis involves the mycorrhizal networks, the underground fungal threads that connect multiple trees. If two trees are part of the same fungal web, signals and nutrients may move more freely between them. Fungi themselves may mediate interactions, favoring the transfer of resources between trees that offer the most stable long-term partnership. But none of this is confirmed. What's strange is that these behaviors occur before visible cues would make sense. A seedling reacts to kin before the canopy forms. Roots avoid entanglement before competition begins. It suggests some form of preemptive recognition. Not reactive, but anticipatory. And this goes beyond cooperation. In some cases, trees seem to avoid growing too close to others entirely, not for lack of space, but as a kind of selection. Saplings spaced at regular intervals with no apparent environmental constraint. patterns that suggest more than randomness. Other studies show trees that alter branch angles to reduce shading of nearby individuals, especially when those neighbors are of the same species or genetically similar. The structure of the crown changes. Growth becomes asymmetric. The tree adapts to its company. These are not rapid changes. They happen over years, over decades. But the consistency of the outcome, reduced overlap, altered posture, delayed branching, suggests more than chance. Still, we hesitate to call it choice. Choice implies agency, intention, conscious weighing of options. Trees do not choose in that sense, but they do respond in ways that differ, depending on who is nearby. That's the mystery. And the deeper question may not be, how do they recognize kin, but rather, why does it matter? Evolution favors success. So why would a tree invest less when surrounded by relatives? Why share resources or slow growth when competition might yield more? The answer may lie in inclusive fitness. A tree doesn't know this, of course, but the pattern persists. Self-restraint near kin, aggression near strangers, but it's not universal. Some species don't show this behavior. Others only do under certain conditions: soil type, light availability, species density. The rule is not absolute, and that's what makes it beautiful. Somewhere underground, a tree senses another, and it decides, not with thought, but with growth, to stretch in a new direction, to slow, to yield, or to rise in full strength. We don't know exactly how it makes that call, or what cues matter most. But what we see above ground is the result. A pattern of living things that seem to choose without ever having to move. Sometimes a tree doesn't fade slowly. It fails all at once. You return to a grove that was green the season before, and something has changed. The leaves are brown. The bark is cracking. The canopy has thinned. And not just one tree, dozens, maybe hundreds. A quiet collapse, sudden, without warning. There is no fire, no visible insect swarm. Just absence, just stillness. This has been seen across continents, in multiple species over many years. One of the most studied examples is sudden aspen decline, a large-scale dieback of aspen trees that began in the early 2000s across Western North America. In some affected areas, up to 60% of mature aspen trees died within a few years. Whole stands collapsed. What had been dense and thriving became bare. Standing trunks with no leaves, brittle bark, root systems that failed to resprout. Researchers looked for a single cause. They tested for pathogens, insects, fungi, soil chemistry. None could fully explain it. In some areas, bark beetles were present. In others, not. Some trees showed signs of disease. Others died cleanly, without infection. Climate was a likely factor. A series of dry years, unusually hot summers. But again, the pattern wasn't simple. Some groves in similar conditions remained healthy. Others failed despite moderate weather. Even genetically identical clones, common in aspens, died at different rates in different regions. There was no singular answer. Instead, it became a tangle of partial causes: drought stress weakening trees, leading to reduced root function, making them vulnerable to opportunistic pests and secondary pathogens. A cascade, a threshold crossed. But what pushed them past it, and why only some, remains unclear, and is not only aspens. Sudden diebacks have been observed in oak woodlands, beech groves, even eucalyptus stands. In each case, the details differ, but the shape of the story is familiar. Trees that seem stable begin declining, not over decades, but over months. And often, the decline affects multiple individuals at once. These aren't old trees reaching the end of life. Many are in their prime, healthy by all measures the year before. Then not. Sometimes the dieback begins at the crown, a thinning of the upper leaves. Sometimes it starts in the roots. Sometimes the outer bark begins to peel. Often there's no visible signal until it's too late. And in the years afterward, regrowth is sparse. New shoots don't take. Seeds germinate, then fail. The system doesn't reset, it lingers. We've come to think of tree death as gradual, the long arc of time, rot, renewal. But these cases break that arc. They suggest fragility where we expected resilience, and they raise questions. Is this a symptom of broader stress? Cumulative, invisible until the moment of failure? Is it a form of ecological tipping point, where subtle pressures stack until the system breaks? Or is there something else? A signal we haven't measured, a threshold we don't yet recognize. Some researchers are exploring hydraulic failure, when internal water columns collapse under tension during drought, causing air bubbles that block sap flow. Others study carbon starvation, when trees close their stomata to preserve water, but in doing so, stop photosynthesizing long enough to starve their own tissues. Both are plausible, both have evidence, but neither explains why two trees side by side, same species, same soil, same sun, can face such different outcomes. Sometimes, the mystery is spatial. Dieback forms in patterns, almost like rings. Healthy trees at the edge, failing ones at the center, as if something moved inward or outward. But no single agent is found, even when symptoms are clear: brittle wood, sudden leaf loss, root decay. The root cause remains blurred, not absent, just unresolved. And in that uncertainty, something else emerges: humility. Scientists don't always know what holds a tree up. Not fully. We know parts of the system, the water, the sugars, the soil, but how all of it weaves together into survival, and how that balance breaks, is still beyond us. Sudden diebacks remind us that collapse doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes quietly, like sleep, like stillness, like breath held too long, and the tree, once standing, is simply no longer there. Just bark, just silence, just a question where life used to be. A tree has no ears, no tympanic membrane, no auditory nerve, and yet it may still hear, not sound as we experience it, not melody or language, but vibration, movement through air, through soil, through water, pressure waves that shift molecules and whisper through matter. And in some cases, a tree responds. In laboratory settings, roots of certain plants have been observed growing towards specific sound frequencies. In one study, corn roots exposed to low-frequency vibrations, around 200 Hz, altered their direction, bending toward the source. When no sound was present, growth remained straight. Other studies showed that root tips increase growth rate in response to rhythmic pulses, while different frequencies may inhibit growth or trigger stress responses. There is no eardrum, no brain to interpret the signal, but something is registering the vibration. We know that sound is not confined to air. In soil, it travels through particles. In wood and living tissues, cells, membranes, fluid channels can all experience these waves as motion. Tiny shifts, microscopic pulls. Inside plant cells are structures called mechanoreceptors, proteins that respond to physical stimuli. When membranes stretch, these receptors open channels. Ions flow in. Electrical potentials change. Signals are sent. This is how plants respond to wind, to touch, to weight, and perhaps to sound. If a root tip passes through soil and encounters a faint vibration, its cells may experience those waves as stretch, as signal, as information. But how the frequency is interpreted and why certain tones produce consistent behaviors remains unclear. In some experiments, exposure to specific frequencies increased gene expression linked to water uptake or to stress resistance. In others, plants exposed to friendly sound environments, gentle rhythms, soft tones, showed improved growth compared to those in silence or irregular noise. Even more curious, when the sound of chewing insects is played near certain plants, they begin producing defensive chemicals before any actual damage occurs. The vibration alone triggers the response. This has been observed in trees as well, where chemical defenses increase in reaction to the sound of predation, even in the absence of harm. We don't fully understand the detection pathway. Sound waves don't penetrate equally. They reflect, scatter, absorb. Yet trees respond selectively, not to all vibration, but to particular patterns. It suggests filtering, selectivity, not conscious but structured. And not all parts of the tree behave the same. Roots appear especially sensitive, perhaps because they are constantly exploring, searching, navigating. In the soil, the vibration is information, the movement of water, the tunneling of insects, the motion of predators or kin. A rich world of mechanical cues. Shoots and leaves may respond differently. Some plants have shown changes in leaf movement or stomatal behavior when exposed to specific sound frequencies. Others produce altered levels of hormones like auxin and ethylene. Still, this field is young. The concept of plant bioacoustics, the study of how plants perceive and produce sound, remains controversial in some circles. The mechanisms are difficult to isolate. Replication is challenging, but the patterns keep appearing. A root grows toward running water, even when the moisture gradient in the soil would suggest the opposite. A seedling curves gently toward a low hum. A tree increases chemical defenses in response to sound alone. These are observations. They ask for interpretation, and they invite a gentler kind of attention. If a tree responds to vibration, if it hears through tension and membrane shift, then its silence is more active than we thought. It is listening, not for words, but for waves, for rhythms, for disturbance. It responds to the world as a body, feeling, flexing, shifting toward what matters. In a grove, you may not hear the sounds that roots hear, but they're there, layered in soil, carried by insects, echoed in the hollow of bark. And trees without ears are part of that world, perceiving, responding, orienting their growth by waves we cannot feel. No language, no melody, just vibration, and the body's answer to it. Time moves slowly in a tree, but it doesn't disappear. It gathers, layer by layer, year by year. The trunk thickens with memory, not of thought, not of feeling, but of change held in rings. Each circle a record, a signature, a mark of what the world was like, one season at a time. We know that tree rings can tell us things. Their width reveals growth rates. Wide rings for good years. Narrow rings for drought, frost, or damage. But the rings carry more than size. They carry chemistry. In the cells of each ring are traces of the air the tree breathed, the water it pulled from the ground, the particles that settled on its leaves. These traces become locked in wood, preserved in shape and ratio, sometimes for centuries, sometimes for millennia. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, has revealed climate histories, volcanic eruptions, solar cycles, and more. In a single trunk, scientists have found evidence of cold decades, radioactive fallout, insect plagues, and fires that passed in silence. A tree doesn't react the way we do, but it records, and sometimes it records things that didn't happen here. In the forests of North America, researchers have found ring anomalies that correspond with volcanic eruptions in distant parts of the world, like the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815. That year, trees across the globe grew narrow rings, reflecting the year without a summer that followed. Wetter volcanic ash in the atmosphere cooled the planet and dimmed the sun. But Tambora erupted in Indonesia, thousands of miles away. The trees never saw the ash, and yet they reacted. In that sense, a tree can be touched by things far beyond its forest. The signal arrives not as sound or heat, but as shadow, less light, lower temperatures, altered wind, changes in rainfall, a global whisper stored in wood, and sometimes the signals are more local, but still mysterious. There are trees that carry scars of events never seen by anyone alive. A lightning strike that blackened one ring. A season of chemical stress from a factory that's now long gone. Some trees have rings that show radiocarbon spikes from nuclear testing in the mid-20th century. Silent witnesses to a world in conflict. Others show cosmic ray anomalies linked to solar storms or fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field. We measure them only recently, but trees felt them decades ago, quietly, without sound. They recorded the moment in isotopes, in rings no thicker than a coin's edge. The precision is astonishing. A skilled researcher can count back year by year, like flipping pages of a book. In some cases, tree rings have been used to calibrate carbon dating because their sequence is so reliable. In others, they help date wooden artifacts, lost settlements, forgotten structures. The tree becomes a timeline, not just for itself, but for the place, the region, the planet, and the mystery remains. How does this signal get in? Some responses make sense: drought, cold, stress. But others are harder to explain. Long-distance correlation. Trees growing miles apart showing identical anomalies in the same year, even when local conditions differed. Did something pass through the sky, through the soil, through the shared air? We don't always know. But the tree knew enough to change. That change became shape. That shape became story. You can't read it with your eyes alone, but it's there, spiraling inward, older and darker with each ring. At the center is the beginning, the seedling that once pressed upward, not yet a trunk, not yet a witness. Everything since has been added, not erased, just layered, held. Not all trees keep these records. Some rot from the inside. Some lose rings to fire or fungi. Others are cut down before they're old enough to say much. But those that survive become archives, silent, rooted, resistant to noise. They do not speak, but they remember. And when we read them, we glimpse a timeline longer than our own. A memory without thought. A record without bias. A secret kept in silence, one ring at a time.